welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am actually extremely excited to be chatting with this author today we don't do the video part of the podcast on Turn the Page. You only hear the audio, but all I can tell you is that her office is the best. And this is no like shade at anybody who I interview and I've seen your office. Like, this is just like one of the best ones I've ever seen. It's gorgeous and there's books like everywhere. And I would never want to leave if I was her. But we are going to chat a little bit today about The Curse of Hester Gardens. So welcome, Tamika Thompson. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you would, in your own words, give us a synopsis of this book.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As you said, my name is Tamika Thompson. The book, The Curse of Hester Gardens, follows a community in a public housing project and one mom who is facing the twin specters of gun violence and a supernatural curse. And my background is in journalism before I became a writer. And so much of what went into this book came from my research and my work as a journalist.
So it's a really unique book in a lot of ways. It is full of different ideas of what a haunting could be, both metaphorically and like in reality. And it centers around, is it Nana or Nona?
Nona.
Nona. So it centers around Nona, and it begins kind of in the past. She has three young boys. She is raising them in Hester Gardens, which is like a project housing. Is
Yes.
it? Yes,
Yes.
in Michigan, I believe.
Yes.
And it's really hard to be raising three young Black boys in the world, and she's doing the best that she absolutely can. And it starts with just this really sweet interaction between her and her boys and her neighbor and her neighbor's grandson. And next thing you know, everybody's grown up. Her middle son, Marcus, is about to graduate high school, but he's going into college. He got into an Ivy League school, and Nona's really happy, but she carries a lot of grief with her because not only did she find out that her husband, who she loved with all of her heart, was hiding a secret from her about who he really was, but you also find out that between that prologue and now, her oldest son, Kendall, had been shot and killed. So there is just so much story that happens between the lines. And as she is getting ready to hopefully send her middle son off to a place far, far away from Hester Gardens, she starts to feel notes of things that happened when they went bad before. So, I mean, you say that like journalism like kind of brought you the idea for this. Where did the voices for this story come from specifically? Because it's told in Nona's perspective. It's told in like it's told from quite a few points of view, and I wouldn't shed any one of them for the story because I think you need it for the full picture. But tell us a little bit about where it all started for you.
This is a deeply personal book, in addition to the research, because I grew up in a high crime neighborhood in Detroit. And I was surrounded by guns and I was surrounded by gun violence, both the positive aspects of guns, where my father, he was a hunter, he used to hunt, and the negative aspects that close family members and friends were shot to death and killed. Some of my earliest memories were people that we had lost to gun violence. And so the characters that you see here are people who I encountered in my life, not specific people, but composites of people that I encountered in my life. Family members, neighbors, friends. And my mother grew up in a public housing project, and there was a public housing project called Herman Gardens, which was about a mile away from where I grew up. And I had friends and family who lived there, and I visited often. And the setting and the people were people that I knew and places that I had been, but I didn't fully understand what was going on. I didn't fully grasp the meaning behind everything when I was growing up. It wasn't until I went off to college. I went to Columbia University and I studied political science. And then later, when I became a journalist and I started to study youth violence and gun violence, that I realized that the situation that we were in when I was growing up was one that had very much been constructed by the way that our society is set up. It wasn't happenstance. The idea that, people would be in low income housing, the ideas around economic oppression and poor education, poor medical care, and what these things look like, that is sort of the backdrop to this story. And that when you mention between the lines, that's what's between the lines of everything, is this heaviness of their situation.
I think there is, I believe, a quote in the book that says something to the effect of the only ghosts here are poverty.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. But it really is just like it's, so there is two parts to it. There's the supernatural aspect to it, which is a slow burn in a really good way. And the reason I say that is because the other part to it is the fact that, like Nona, like that this is that there's supernatural aspects to this because if you read the back or if you read, any reviews, they mention that. But the thing is that I found while I was reading it that I wasn't really sure if they were quite there until it was impossible to deny that they were there. Because really what we were reading was just about a family and a mom who lived in a place where everything was really set up for failure of herself, of her family, of, her marriage was doomed to fail because of the way things were. Her children were, no matter what, there were so many pitfalls that they could so easily fall into, even without wanting to, just wanting to like make it through the day, that it was sort of hard to figure out where the ghosts were really coming in and what the ghosts really were. So, like, good job.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you are a fan of horror to begin with, and if the fact that this was going to be like, an untraditional haunting story, but in the same vein, a traditional haunting story was your original goal.
I have been a horror consumer since I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. I grew up on a steady diet of horror films and horror books. And by the time I came to journalism, horror was just such a big part of my life without me even fully realizing that that's where I was headed. It wasn't until I made the transition to writing that I realized that everything that I was crafting was very dark and included a lot of supernatural elements from the start. So when I began researching this, I actually wasn't researching this for a book. I began researching this as a journalist for a documentary that I thought I was going to be producing. And for a number of reasons, that documentary didn't happen. But I had these voices of the people that I had interviewed, particularly the mothers and the young people who were experiencing the violence, continued to haunt me. And there was a woman that I spoke to who had lost more than one son. And the idea that you can lose one and be so fearful of the remaining ones stuck with me. And so I knew from the beginning that this was going to be supernatural because there is so much in the story that is so heavy. The the mice, the rodents, the the mold, the leaky faucets, the bubbling up, toilet. It's just so much of just the setting and what they experience on a day-to-day basis was very gothic. It everything was in disrepair. Nothing had been kept up. Nothing had been maintained. They called the housing authority and no one would repair anything. And so the fact that these characters haunted me, I think goes into this. That's where the haunting aspect comes from. The idea that there is a curse, but what is the curse? Is the curse supernatural, or is the curse this intergenerational poverty, this intergenerational devastation that they experience? The fact that for a lot of African American people, we have nothing passed down and have to start over again every generation. So I think I knew from the beginning that I was going to pull all aspects of myself, the horror part, the journalism part, the lived experience, and put it into this book. And I think that that's where all of those aspects came from.
The themes are like just this, cycle of boyhood, manhood, and also motherhood. And, I- it's it, it's really kind of like easy to see where the cracks start setting in for pretty much everybody. I really empathized with Nona and, her fear and her situation. And even if it was or not was not supernatural, just that feeling like that you get like behind, like that tingling feeling that like, you're remembering how you feel when something horrible happened and you feel like, okay, this is going to happen again. Was she the first character then? Because you mentioned the mothers were really, what started for you. Was she the first character that came in? And then, how did the side characters weave in? Was there somebody who maybe was a little bit more vocal than you thought they might be when you started reading the story?
She was definitely the first character. I started with her, and I actually had written this as a multiple POV from the very beginning, where she was a little more turned, the volume on her was a little more turned down than some of the other characters, and I eventually turned her up so that she could be the main thread for the story arc. But the character that resonated with me so much based on my research on gang violence when I was a journalism student was Peter. Peter is the leader of the local gang. And one of the things that I say about this book is that there are no villains, no human villains in this book, that the villain is the poverty and the economic oppression that they find themselves in. And I think Peter is a perfect example when you see him in that opening, in that prologue that you mentioned, that he's a very young boy. He's about the age of my son in that part right now, around around 4 to 6 years old, where they're just figuring things out. They're missing some teeth, and they have an outlook on life that is very positive, even though their situation may be what it is. They don't fully know yet where they are and who they are in the world. They know what makes them happy, they know who they love. But as time goes on, Peter loses so much and experiences so much trauma that he becomes a character that is almost unrecognizable from the one that he originally was in that prologue. And so much of my research on gun violence, I looked at gang violence, I looked at school shootings, I looked at mass shootings, I looked at homicides of individuals and suicides. And one of the things that was a sort of through line in all of this was that at some point before any of these young people picked up a gun, and it's typically young men, about 80% is usually around 80% young men who do this. At some point, they experienced a trauma. They either were victimized or they witnessed someone who was close to them being victimized across the board. Didn't matter if it was gang violence, mass shooting, school shooting. And we kind of put these things in different categories. We kind of look at these as different. And we try to come up with all sorts of justifications as to why these things occur. But that was the one constant. And when I, as a journalism student, spoke to gang members and I started to talk to them about their youth, there was usually something. It could be that a family member had done this to them. It could have been the local police had brutalized them or a family member, but they were witnessing or experiencing violence. And that was the thing that changed them. That was the thing that changed Peter. He started off this young, sweet boy who loved everyone, loved his grandma, loved Marcus and Kendall and Lance and all of Nona's sons. But then as time passes, he is filled with so much hate and so much anger and so much violence. And I think that he was the one character that really whispered to me throughout my crafting of this novel.
No, I actually, I can totally see that because, yeah, when you do, it is really jarring to see the little kid in the beginning, and then, Peter much later. And you could say that about anybody, any of the characters. But it's like it's not like I didn't empathize with how Nona felt about him being around her kids, especially when, we heard the whole backstory and we understood what the situation was now. But it's like it's great, sad, but also, like really like important, I think, that you started the story that way because you really did get to see that, hey, this was a little kid. A little kid at one point. And I think that that's like like not showing that really dehumanizes people. Like when you're only talking about when things got really bad and you're only talking about the violence, like you always kind of have to, or at least I try to tell myself, I'm like, at one point this was a child. At one point this child probably wanted his parents or, like wanted, it's really because otherwise it gets really easy to just not really put yourself in the perspective of the fact that, hey, there are reasons why somebody gets from point A to point B and they're not good. Like you were saying, they're not, and then those those reasons happened because of a similar one. So it's a cycle.
And it's part of Nona's struggle as
Yeah.
well, because the thing that she comes back to is the fact that she helped raise Peter. She actually loves him as much as she hates him, as much as she grows to hate him. And so that is the struggle in communities where there is violence, or violence is everyone knows everyone else. Who have lived, you have shared food, you have broken bread together, you have helped someone, when they needed it, you have watched the other person's children. And I think that that is the point, is the idea that they have a community and they want everyone, the mothers in this community want everyone to do well, even though they are up against such odds, not because of pride or any sort of greed, them wanting to get out, or they just want basics in life. They just want a safe neighborhood, a safe community. They just want their kids to be able to go to school and not have to worry about not coming home at the end of the day.
Without giving too much away, you also have Nona's still husband Vance, which, again, she finds out that she is not married to the man that she thought she was. And then you have a relationship sort of with her pastor, and she clings to faith a lot to get through things, which is understandable. And it makes like this dynamic really interesting, especially, because he is helping her children, and he does seem to genuinely care for her and vice versa. Um, that was also a really interesting aspect of the story.
The thing that I think I was toying with there is this idea of predation and how many institutions and entities prey on poor people. It's expensive to be poor. It really is. And the hospital that is there, Medford Hospital, knows how to sew up a person after a gunshot wound, but their medical care is really subpar. So much so that people have taken to calling the hospital Deadford, because you go in, but you probably won't come out, just for regular medical care. The church, the Black church as an institution in this fictional town, is predatory, is extracting money through tithes and offerings from people who have very little to begin with in order to enrich itself. And the juxtaposition of this palatial church, with these plasma screen televisions, and he's rubbing shoulders with politicians, the pastor is, and they have so much wealth and so many resources, but because they have extracted it from the people who don't. And this relationship with her pastor, and I think the pastor really does believe that he's in love with her. Like, I don't think that the pastor
Oh
is.
no, I got that. I
Yeah,
got
yeah.
that. I mean, it was like all I'm going to say again, without not giving too much away, I rolled my eyes a lot, but I do believe that he really, really believed this,
Yes.
even though I rolled my eyes a lot.
Right, right. He's flawed, right? He's flawed. He's as flawed as her husband. He is on a pedestal because he's a man of God. And that's what the community, the church community, and I saw this growing up. The church community very much worships their pastor, and they place this pastor on a pedestal, and this pastor can do no wrong. And that comes back to bite her in the rear in this story, in a way that, I don't want to give away, but so much of this relationship is wrong, and not just because they're married. So much of it is wrong because of what it stands for. And I think that churches within the community are just another entity that either is not supportive or is, preying on its people, the very people that they claim that they are there to help.
Absolutely, and very well done in the story. And there's a power imbalance there too. Like that's the other thing, like they're really embedded in the community, but there still is such an imbalance between him and the community that puts so much faith in him.
Exactly, exactly. And then, it made her question faith, because that's part of her arc, right? Where she's not only questioning him, she begins to question her faith in God, and what has it all amounted to? And has God been helping her? Has God been supporting her? Why has she given so much of herself to this church when all she is getting in return is just grief and devastation and where is God? Why isn't God helping her? And I feel like so many people of faith have been there, particularly after a loss, where you begin to wonder, why am I doing this? Is God really listening? Is there a God?
Yeah, no. And then there is a supernatural aspect to it, which I'll let the readers take that journey. But this was just a really well-crafted story. Like the horror comes from the supernatural, but I think more from the whole picture and why there is a curse of Hester Gardens.
I thought it was interesting when that line comes up, and I don't want to give too much away, but I thought it was interesting that Vance is the one that you mentioned earlier about the poverty being I
Hmm.
thought it was interesting that Vance, her husband, is the one who brings that up because he feels so justified and everything, every wrong and illegal thing he has ever done, he feels so justified because of every wrong thing that had been done to him. And so I that line is so true and it's so resonant, but there is a, a bit of it where it is also an excuse. It's also an excuse, right? And it's the excuse that he uses. It is the justification that he uses for pretty much every behavior that he exhibits. And so it just makes total sense that he would be the one who repeats this over and over and over again.
Check this book out. It is definitely something people will be thinking about and talking about for a while. Are you writing anything else at the moment?
Yes, I am. I'm working on my second novel actually, and I'm in the throes of it. Like I'm in the middle of it. So it was this morning because I was writing it all last night. So it was a switch this morning to come on and talk to you about this. But it is another horror book, but it's a departure from this one. It's part of the two book deal with Kensington, which I've been so excited about. Um, and it's in a completely different environment, completely different characters, and is a bit lighter than this book, even though it is very heavy and horrific.
I look forward to reading it and maybe speaking to you again.
Yes, oh, I would love to. I'm so glad you had me on.
I'm so glad you were here. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Tamika Thompson.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.